Welcome to episode 15 of the DWRD Net stationery feed. Today's guest is Carola, or as you would know her as FromCarola online. Welcome, Carola, and just give yourself, introduce yourself and give a quick introduction to who you are and what you do.
We're off to a great start. Hi, Derek. I'm Carola, or from Carola, on most socials. Basically I enjoy sharing my process of using fountain pen inks and watercolor paints to do abstract art. And I love sharing that process. And so a lot of the content that you see online on my socials will be kind of focused around that.
Okay, wonderful. And that's how I came to know Carola, just from um, watching one of Olive Octopus's streams and seeing references to Carola's art and whatnot. So we'll have links and all that in the show notes so you can check out her art and her process that we talk about today online. So definitely check that out as well. So to get started, I have kind of our standard level setting questions. So first up, what do you currently have inked? What have you been writing with lately?
So I have about 12 currently inked fountain pens, and on a monthly basis, I try to keep it around 12 to 15. That's kind of my uh, sweet spot, if you will. What I'm kind of excited for, and I'm looking over here because my pen tray is here. So
You mean one of these? I have my
yeah,
stationary stack tray sitting right here as well. I
yeah.
fully get it.
Exactly. So, for us, right, like fountain pen enthusiasts, a lot of it is enjoying the writing experience and really enjoying that, putting pen to paper. But I will say a lot of it has to do with the looks of fountain pens too, right? So when we have it out in front of us on our desk, it's like it's calling, it's beckoning us to use those tools. And so I love having my fountain pens displayed. Um, they kind of range too. For me, what I ink up is sometimes based on the inks. So, inks I'm currently really excited about, what mood I'm in. So, seasonally, that might change. Usually, like spring, summer, I go with like bright, cheery, fun colors. In the fall and winter, I tend to go earthy tones, a little bit cooler tones. And then the second thing I kind of think about is the nib. So for me, most of my fountain pens have different nibs in them, and they can be custom ground. They can be, meant for certain like specific reasons. So some of the finer nibs I use for taking notes and in my planner, so it has to dry faster. And some of the more fun nibs, like architect or my techo nibs, those ones are more for like journaling and when I have time to really enjoy my writing. So that's what I have currently inked. And they kind of range from different types of pens too. So I have Esterbrook, I have Leonardo, I have Pilot, but then I have a few maker pens too. So I'm kind of excited about Skogsy pens. This one's a little pocket fountain pen. And yeah, kind of having a range between pocket fountain pens as well as full size cigar shaped classic type of fountain pens.
In your pocket pens, do you use cartridges or do you use only pocket pens you can throw a converter in?
It's kind of a mix actually. Currently, I think the pocket pens I have inked up, they use cartridges, and then I just refill the cartridges.
Gotcha.
I do sometimes use a Franklin Christoph Pocket 20, and I eyedrop that one, so it does vary on the pen.
No, that makes perfect sense. There's so many cool pocket pens coming out, and in general, I don't really like using cartridges, but I know at some point I'm just going to have to break down if I want to have the cool pocket pen. I'm going to have to, you know, go back to cartridges and, just fill them up. It's a little bit more hassle, but I know it'll be worth it. So, in terms of if you had a grail pen, if someone would hand you any pen ever made, what would it be?
It would have to be the Pilot Namiki Makie Milky Way fountain pen, and that's been my grail pen for years. Just because it's one of those pens that I aspire to, and I feel like everyone kind of has one of those pens. Like, even if you could afford it, I wouldn't jump into it. I kind of feel like I have to get to a level in my hobby that I would do it justice to own it and use it. And so that's something I'm working towards owning one day, hopefully, or one of those
No,
types of pens anyway.
very cool. Yeah, the Arushi and the special editions are kind of hard to pass up. But then again, when you do the mental math, wow, I could get a bunch of other maker pins and other things during that. So it's definitely a good thing to set a goal around something like that. So, what about inks? Do you tend to stick to tried and true, or do you like to experiment with all different inks, or a little mix and match of their?
I kind of do a mix and match. Certain pens will have certain inks in them. So, for example, my Skogsy fountain pen is in the black Ultim. So it's, a sleek black. And inside, I actually have a double broad SIG Franklin Christoph nib. And it's inked with platinum chokuro, which is the blackest of all blacks on the market. Is what they sort of market it as. And so for me, that's like the perfect combination of aesthetics, like sleek, classic, and the ink, is just like black. So it's great for, note taking and like certain purposes. So I have certain pens like that, and then others that I'm kind of like, it's a free for all. So, just new inks that I get that I'm really excited about. That's what I use those pens for. So it's kind of a
No,
mix
I
of
fully
the two.
get the Chowkuro. My Esterbrook Raven, all blacked out
Yes.
Chowkuro,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
got a extra fine or Japanese extra fine that I had Matthew Chen take down from a medium. So
Okay.
you know it's just
Yeah.
fine enough where the pigment writes without bunching up. But yeah, there's something about that black pen with the blackest of black inks that really just is almost a necessity.
Yeah.
So what about paper? What kind of paper do you prefer to write on? Is that another one where you like to experiment, or you kind of have, I love this paper, and that is the paper that I'm always going to use?
Um, I will say that I have paper that I tend to sort of stick with. Tomoe River paper is kind of my go-to. And then I would say second probably is Midori, because I do like the cream paper, but I don't know if I'm the type that uses it like for daily use. And but I have experimented with different types of papers. So, like at the SF Pen Show last year, I got Yamamoto paper, like the tasting block. So you could like pick different papers to sort of add to this memo box or memo block box. And so I've been kind of like, paper tasting. And so, yeah, I have paper that I use, regularly because it's just so accessible to me. And then others that I kind of like to test. So if I come across paper that's fountain pen friendly, that I can paint on, that doesn't, that behaves with fountain pen inks, then like I don't really care what kind it is or what brand it is. If you behave, I'll use you.
No, that makes perfect sense. I kind of do a little bit of the same. Like I'm in a plotter phase now, so I'm really enjoying the plotter paper, and but also punching other papers to put in the plotter. So I've been doing a lot more paper experimentation than I would have when I first got started in pens, because that didn't do that then. But now it's the
Mhm.
time to kind of make up for lost time and do the Yamamoto paper samplers, or try this, try that. So, and
Yeah.
now for my favorite question that I love asking: what is your favorite stationery adjacent item? Being it a bag, a case, a book weight, something that is not a pen, ink, or paper, but it's in constant use on your desk or in your process.
So I kind of have two things. So one is I will say I will use any kind of like pen rest. So this one is the Coffee Monsters Co. This one is from Toyoka Craft, and it's great for like portable sort of, on the go type of pen rest. So I'm like all about pen rests, pen trays, anything that I can put my pen on, display it, but also sort of protect it from, being on my desk. And then the second thing I always have is a clip. So I have my TN brass clip, because we're using notebooks that like we have to hold open when we're using it, and so having a clip handy is like my go-to. So
No,
yeah, I'm
definitely.
curious. I'm
No, go
curious
ahead.
what you might use, Derek.
Well, I actually was going to say I have two traveler's clips. One is always in my Galen with my journal with my Good Made Better book weight. And lately, my latest things, just in terms of keeping it brief, and pens, papers, and accessories, I got the stationery stack Alfie tray, which has made my desk organization much better. And that's something I'm kind of in process of using it before I do the rest of the video on it. And then my latest couple of pins, I got my first Leonardo Memento Zero. I got a Gravitas Sentry, and I picked up from the Pen Addict Slack a Diplomat Elox, and it's the orange and black. And this gave me a reason to use my Lamy orange ink that I've had for a decade, and I never really used much because it matches. So I used to be very much, oxblood, black inks, dark blue inks. I'm trying to be more adventuresome with the color spectrum now and what I
Mhm.
use in my various pens. Because like you, at my desk right now, I've got probably 15 that are on my desk inked. I
Yeah.
probably have 40 inked with between
Uh,
other cases and whatnot. But having the tray, I'm actually rotating through them. Each time I need to write something, I'm kind of reaching over and grabbing a pen instead of just having the one on a little tray. So it's nice to adjust and learn a new process. But let's get on to the important part and talking about your online art and your persona of the from Carola. So to get started, when did you actually get into pens and stationery hobby as a whole? Like, is this a lifetime thing, or is it something that was fairly recent that just kind of grew exponentially as time went on?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I've always been into stationery. So, like, my earliest childhood memories include making stickers. So, like, my sister and I would cut little designs out of paper and roll up tape on it and use that as, our makeshift sort of stickers. And I love doing things like that. And then in my teen years, my mom would take me and my two sisters to the local stationery shop, which was kawaii. So it had like really cute, like Japanese stationery. And so I got into like Sanrio products and like stickers and little like ring binders and stuff. And so I can remember specifically like always being into pens, but like gel pens. So I loved collecting like different colors and different, tip sizes, and always, sprucing up my notes in school and using planners in school for writing down notes and things. Um, my fountain pen hobby. I was kind of around fountain pens. I spent a lot of my childhood in Germany. And my older sister at the time, she started using fountain pens in school, as they do. And so I was kind of introduced to them through her. But then we moved to Canada, and I kind of didn't, I didn't use fountain pens in school here in Canada. And so I kind of self taught, or I kind of like learned about fountain pens a lot later. It was around 2012 ish that I got my first two fountain pens, a Parker City Urban and a Lamy Safari. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to use these for journaling. And so 2012 to 2020 is kind of when I just stuck to those two pens, didn't really do much else. 2020, everyone kind of, threw themselves into different types of hobby. I threw myself down the fountain pen rabbit hole. I pretty much dove in headfirst. I found out about the Pen Addict. I found all these, journaling YouTube videos and Twitch streams. And so I was like, okay, there's a whole community of like fountain pen enthusiasts. So that's how I kind of found out about, all kinds of inks. And yeah, I pretty much went from like two fountain pens to, a multitude. And same with ink bottles. Like I went from having like one ink bottle for, 8 years to a lot of ink bottles. And so, yeah, that's kind of my progress in terms of like being into stationery and then getting into fountain pens specifically. But I've always been one of those people that I just love, paper. I love pens. I love the whole experience of using analog tools, and anything that I can use creatively. Uh, just I find it so intriguing and exciting.
So then you were already a journaler of sorts, and then you got into the fountain pen side, which enhanced. So when did you add the art, your love of art into the journaling and creative process to kind of meld all three of those disciplines together?
Yeah, I would say I started sort of my like creative online presence with hand lettering. And that sort of like comes hand in hand with loving, analog tools, pens, and writing. And so I took a few online classes on hand lettering, modern calligraphy, and learned about, how to sort of get those brush strokes when you're lettering by hand. And that's what I started sharing online. And then I got into sketching and drawing. And again, took a few classes. I think there was one in person class where I learned how to watercolor flowers. And so I kind of learned those techniques from other creatives, right? From other artists in the community. I loved learning sort of their process on how to use certain tools. And then between 2019 to about 2021, so there's like 2 or 3 years in that time frame where I went through major life changes, some grief in my life, some stress. I also did, a coast to coast move in Canada with my husband and my then 2.5-year-old twins. So it was a big sort of, change in my life. And in that time, I turned to something that I always had in my life, which is creativity. And I always found that creativity, in terms of creating art or just spending some time with my stationery supplies, brought me calmness, brought me peace, relaxed me, and kept me kind of, if I felt worries or anxiety or stress in my life, I always thought that if I spend time with my stationery supplies, there's always sort of this joy in it. And so that's kind of what I did. In that time, I sort of explored different ways of creating art. And one of the things I kind of fell in love with is combining what I had learned in terms of sketching flowers, sketching bouquets, and then using, the fountain pens, fountain pen inks that I was acquiring at the same time, and kind of finding a way to balance using those new supplies that I was getting, but always having a core sort of use for them. And that came out in abstract floral art.
Okay. So along those lines, you said you were going through some life changes and whatnot. Did you immediately, since you were already doing, and just make sure I have the timeline correct, you're already sharing hand lettering and things like that online? Did you kind of keep the art as a personal thing at first and then start sharing it, or did you naturally progress into, it was a mental relief doing the art, and did you start sharing that immediately, or did that kind of follow up a little bit later on after you'd had a chance to process life changes and whatnot, and you realize you're really loving this and you wanted to share what you're doing with others?
Yeah, it was about a year or two after I sort of explored, like, my, or I guess I would say practicing sketching flowers, drawing flowers, and then learning a little bit more about how to use fountain pen inks. And I was really into painting at the time. So I was already exploring watercolors, right? And so watercolor paint to fountain pen inks is a natural progression for me, anyways. And so I was learning that myself in that time. And then I think it was about a year in. And at the same time, I was sharing my hand lettering pieces online. And then I started, I think I kind of randomly shared a video or two of me just like in real time painting with fountain pen inks and then drawing flowers on top. And I kind of shared it as sort of like, this is what I'm doing it right now. And I noticed after a couple of those videos, people would message me and they would ask me how I was doing that. They were like, are you doing this in real time? Like, how are you doing that? And so I kind of thought, okay, maybe there's something here. Like for me personally, when I'm painting and drawing, I don't take a lot of time because I can't. I'm a mom, so I don't have a lot of time to myself. But when I do have little blocks of time, I find that I sort of, if I can do something quickly, and that's why I call it abstract, is because it is very like in the flow, intuitive, chaotic, sketchy. Um, so it's kind of in the moment, I'm creating something. And so people asked how I was doing it. And I thought, okay, well, maybe now I'll share a little bit more about it. And so I would, just upload videos on YouTube, on Instagram of me doing it. And that kind of progressed into like, this is my style. And I didn't realize that it was unique enough that people thought, I would love to do that style of drawing. And so I thought, you know what? I would love to share that because I get so much joy out of just being in the moment and creating floral art that if I can share that and I can, get someone else to, if they're going through a stressful moment in their life and they can take a moment and just paint and draw and be really in, that flow, then that makes me happy. So if I can share that sort of feeling of being relaxed and enjoying something just purely for creating art, then I feel like I've fulfilled something in myself.
So you started with, Instagram and YouTube. At what point did you start the world of Twitch? Twitch for me, when I first heard of it, it was always gamers. And now I've learned, within the past probably 6 months, that there's so much creativity, and especially in the stationery hobby, it's got like a regular schedule that at almost any time of day you can find somebody who's using fountain pens or ink. So at what point did that YouTube and Instagram, that's kind of a little bit more passive, move into the active side of streaming on Twitch, where you can get live interaction with people as they're commenting, and you can try stuff in real time as you have people sitting there watching you create this art?
Yeah, I've only been on Twitch for a few months now. I've wanted to, so similar to you, I thought Twitch was like mainly gamers. And it wasn't until I found Brad the Pen Addict on Twitch that I was like, wait, here's someone like sharing just like pens and stationery hauls and journaling and stuff like that. And people are loving it, right? Like there's a whole chat feature of it where you meet people who are into the same thing as you are, who are chatting about, their acquisitions, what they're excited about using, asking questions, answering questions. Like you'll find professionals in there, right? Like you'll find makers who make pens, who fix pens, who do all sorts of things, who are like sharing their tips and techniques and things like that. So, I found myself kind of lurking at first where you're in the background just watching everything. And then I was like, okay, so I can ask questions. People are so kind in this community that I found that they're so willing to answer questions like newbies welcome, right? Like if you don't know much about this community or about pens or stationery in general, ask those questions because people love answering and sharing what has worked for them and what they're into. Um, and so I thought, you know what, there's a part of me that loves engaging with people. Yes, I love sharing, my art and how I do it, but I also really like people sort of, giving me feedback or sharing their stories with me. And I feel like that community building is something I'm really drawn to. And so it was after my first workshop that I taught at the SF Pen Show last year. I kind of floated the idea, and I think it was to Brad. I was kind of like, oh, I'm thinking of teaching on Twitch or not, streaming on Twitch, just like showing what I'm doing. And he was super, super supportive as he is and he was like, yeah, do it. There's a whole bunch of other streamers. And so, yeah. And so a few months ago, I had to sort of figure out the technology as you do. But once I did that, found a setup that worked for me, and started streaming. Like you said, I realized there's like a whole schedule of, people in the makers and crafters category who are doing all sorts of creative stuff. And so I kind of had to find a slot that worked for me. That was also, if you start on someone's stream, you can kind of hop onto the next, hop onto the next, hop onto the next. And at any point in your day, you can tune in and you can find someone who understands you, understands your love for the hobby. And you can kind of hang out with them, right? It's just like a hangout. It's a great sort of vibe that we're in. And so in the past like few months that I've been doing it, I I love it. I think it's so much fun. I love when people chat and just, like I said, ask questions or share their stories. And I feel like that sort of um, give and take, right, is like it's really encouraging as well. Whereas, Instagram, YouTube, you're kind of pushing out content at people. You're kind of talking at them, whereas Twitch is more, it's live. So people can ask you direct questions. And if they don't understand something or they want to sort of share their take on something, it's a great way of showing behind the scenes of, this is what my YouTube video would look like as an output, but here's like everything that goes on behind that, right? It's me playing with inks, it's me spilling ink, it's, me figuring out that this doesn't work, so let's move on to something else. And that's real life. So I love that part.
It's kind of like the Carola version of how it's made.
Yeah.
Instead of watching how it's made, you're getting to watch the process. But to go back to something you mentioned, that was a question I wanted to ask. Let's talk about, how did you get into now teaching classes? You said you taught at San Francisco last year. Was that your very
Mhm.
first class, or did you do any local shows or anything like that first, or did you just dive right into one of the biggest shows there is?
I dove right in. I was like, give me the biggest show. That happened by chance, kind of. So I had been toying with the idea of teaching at an event I was open to teaching. And it was at the California Pen Show last year. So it was in February, where my friend Jenny and I met Cheryl from Rickshaw Bags. And they were looking at my sketchbook, which has, all of my abstract floral art. And they were both like, you know what? You should teach a workshop at a pen show. And I thought, yeah, I mean, I would if I could. And so Cheryl being amazing and encouraging people and having the hookups, she basically was like, you know what? I got this. Like, I'll help you. Let's get you into one of the pen shows. And so she was teaching at the SF Pen Show last year and basically, encouraged me to teach there too. And one thing led to another. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm teaching at the SF Pen Show. And so I had to put together um, a workshop for 2 hours that would encompass not just my process of how to create abstract art, so to have some sort of art piece in the end, but also I wanted to frame that workshop as a creative outlet for a place to sort of play with fountain pen inks and not feel like you're pressured to create something specific in the end. And I enjoyed that workshop so much. Everyone who came, I had 2 sessions. They were both sold out in the end, so I had like full classes, and I was super super nervous because obviously I went into it thinking, yeah, I hope I sort of get my point across of what I want everyone to take away from this class. And in the end, I got so much good feedback. People who were like, they came into that class thinking, well, I can't make the art that you make. And that wasn't the point of the class, right? So in like helping people get past the barrier of, I'm not an artist, or I can't create the specific, art piece, or I don't paint, I don't draw, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You don't have to think you're an artist to create art, to make art. And all you have to do is be open to it and open up yourself to being creative. And so at the end of that class, I've met so many people. I walked around that class and everyone looked at their art piece and basically said, I didn't expect to create this. It was a surprise, right? And that sort of genuine moment of when they realized that they created something beautiful, they created something that they didn't expect to have created, that feeling was just like, it kept me going. And so that's why I decided to stream on Twitch. I decided to continue teaching. Yeah, just because I love that sort of, getting that feeling from people of they have stationary tools. We have fountain pen inks, we have fine liners, we have pens, we have paper. And so, like, why not use that to create art and to enjoy that art while you're making it?
So you go to one of the biggest pen shows, you teach two classes, they're sold out. How has that progressed besides Twitch? Because I believe recently you had your Substack where you had an online thing, what, a week or so ago, based off when we're recording this, where you did like an online class, and then you announced your classes for San Francisco for this next year. So in that interim period, have you taught other classes at any of your local events or any other shows, or are you just kind of naturally building on, San Francisco to San Francisco and then adding in others as you go along?
Yeah, kind of a mix of all of that. So I haven't taught any local sort of classes where I am in British Columbia. It's not easily accessible in terms of like me getting to local, things. And also me being in Canada, there aren't a lot of pen shows that I can, or stationary events in general that I can attend. So that's why, San Francisco makes sense for me because it's just south of where I am. But I have done online workshops. So as you mentioned, the Adventurous Artist Summit, which just wrapped up. It was the last week of June. So that was last week. So I taught a workshop there, which was about intuitive floral art using fountain pens to draw a floral bouquet. And it was an online workshop. It was free to watch. So it's just me sharing, my process of drawing a floral bouquet in the moment using Kaweco sport. And that was super, super fun. The other thing too is I have done a couple of online workshops. I'm part of the Tombow USA creator crew. So last year, so in that sort of hand lettering journey that I've been on for a long time, I've been using Tombow dual brush pens because they are easily accessible and they are great tools, markers for hand lettering, but also for other purposes, for drawing. You can also use them to get the watercolor effect. And so they're kind of like an all around great marker set to have. And they're dual brush. So on one side, it's a brush pen. On the other side, it's sort of like a fine point. And last year, they asked me to join their creator crew, which is a crew of about 10 people, creative people who basically use their products to create content and share out, how they use certain tools. And so I've done 2 online workshops for Tombow. If you go on their site, you can easily access them. And they're kind of like showing how to do the watercolor effect using dual brush pens. So you can find that. Those are free. Go to the Tombow USA site if you're interested in that. And then, yeah, upcoming, I have the San Francisco Pen Show. I have 2 sessions again, same sort of abstract floral art, like intro to painting with watercolor or fountain pen inks. And then drawing on top using a Tombow mono drawing pen, which is a fine liner. And so, it's easy. You have fountain pen inks and you have fine liner. You can do this art. So I have 2 sessions with that. And then I'm also doing a joint workshop with Cheryl from Rickshaw. And her workshop is about bookbinding. And so in our joint one, she's going to show how to make a sketchbook from scratch using paper and folding techniques. And then in my part of the workshop, I'm going to show how we draw flowers and floral bouquets using a fine liner and also if you want a fountain pen. So, a few things that are upcoming. I would love to continue teaching workshops as they sort of naturally come to me. I'm open to those opportunities. And basically, anything where I can kind of share out what I do and get people being creative with their tools again.
No, I love that you said you used a Kaweco Sport. A very inexpensive fountain pen, but something that is easily accessible. It almost makes me think it would be cool to see you do a panel where it's just like you grab cards out of a bag with certain items you have with you. Okay, we're going to use the Twisby green, and we're going to use the Cacunyo, and we're going to use this paper, just like a choose your own adventure, and then to further show that you don't need anything specific. There is no plan. The plan is this is what I have. I'm going to make art. So
Yeah,
that just popped in my mind when you said you used the Kaweco. That would be a neat thing to see, like kind of the choose your own adventure books from back in the day when we were kids, but
yeah.
in terms of creating art.
Yeah, I love that idea, Derek, because I could use a I was Kakamori dip pen. I could use a glass dip pen. So give me any tool and I can show you how to do it.
Well, it's kind of like whose line is it anyway? Might be another thing, where the audience can say, use this, do an audience vote at one of your panels just for like a quick sketch to show that you don't have to have any kind of plan. The plan can be thrown out of the window and you can still make art because art is individual, it's personal. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not all going to be Bob Ross, but Bob Ross would probably be the first one to say anything you do is wonderful. So, that's how art kind of is. But to transition a little bit, you not only do art, when did you start doing writing alongside your art, like on your Substack, articles about your plotter versus traveler's notebook? That's one of the first things when I first kind of, noticed your name on some of the Twitch streams and saw reference to that as I have been traveling, deep diving into the plotter rabbit hole very quickly. You know, when did you start adding in the writing into the hobby in addition to the art?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been into writing. Like I've always loved writing. Like I've always been journaling. And I love getting sort of long word, like lots of words out. Whereas, you can't do it on Instagram because captions. On YouTube, yeah, you could sort of talk your way through things. But a lot of times when you're writing words on paper, you have time to think about it. You have time to sort of frame it in a way that makes sense to you, especially if it's like you're breaking down, plotter versus TN, or, you're sort of, breaking down different steps or techniques or tips, things like that. And I've always been kind of into writing in general. I think writing, like in terms of stationery and art, I probably started doing around 2018 or 2019. And it was around the time I first had my kids, like my twins. I started a website. So that's my website, lillianbella.com, is after my two kids. And I started writing articles for new moms and basically like how to sort of be creative or make time for journaling as a mom. And so I kind of tied those two worlds together a little bit. And that started me out down the path of writing about journaling, about creating art, about how I do that, like what my sort of use for different tools are, and how other people can use them too. Um, and then, yeah, sort of progress from there. And Substack, I think I started last year at some point. And it was just because I kind of found this platform where it was a standalone blog style, but it also had a newsletter attached to it. And so, I could write out a blog post and then publish it, and it would send it to everyone who had, subscribed in their email inbox. And it's like, you don't have to go into Instagram or into a platform to read this long form content. You could just read it in your email. And so I started with, my planner updates, what planners I'm currently using, any new stationery I have and how I've been using that. And then I also do like currently inked on a monthly basis, and then just sort of updating people in long form style of what's going on in my stationery life versus, Instagram was like short pictures, reels, things that are meant to capture people's attention. But Substack and like blog style writing for me is engaging with people who are interested in learning more about that stuff.
No, and that makes perfect sense because as I kind of stumbled into starting YouTube and now I'm really enjoying it, I've started on my website writing in addition to videos because what you do in a video, you're 100% spot on. You need context sometimes, but context doesn't make for a good video. You're not going to sit there and go, "Oh, well, I was thinking of this," because then no one's going to watch the video. They're going to get bored because the attention spans. So, that makes perfect sense of having that non-algorithm place where you can just write, and then people who will appreciate what you do have the choice to go read it through their email or through an RSS feed and things like that. So that makes perfect sense. And we'll put a link to your Substack because I personally read it through RSS because I have too much email anyway. But that's the nice thing with technology, using it to how it works for you, just like our stationery items to kind of cater that reading because there's that's something that I kind of rediscovered as I got back into pins on round two, you might say, is use the more like RSS is kind of the analog technology at this point, using that where you're not seeing pictures, it's just text links, you're reading text and you're not getting pushed, "Oh, we think you want to see this." No, I want to see what this person I'm following says, not this advertisement for whatever. So that's always a nice little add-on. So I think we're kind of at the point where I'm at the last question that I like to ask everybody of what's next for Carola and from Carola, in general.
What's next for me? Honestly, just whatever is my natural progression in this path. Like, I would have never guessed that sharing my hand lettering pieces, years ago. I think I started my Instagram in 2016 and it was all just hand lettering pieces. From that to what I share now and, having Twitch streams, having a blog on Substack, YouTube, like I would have never guessed that I would have ended up here. And then on top of that, teaching workshops, teaching live, actually engaging one on one with people. I think the introvert in me would have like run away screaming years ago, being like, no, I can't do that. And yet here I am doing it because, I'm pushing myself to get out of my sort of bubble and comfort zone. And if people want to learn or share, their time with me to practice art, I'm here for it, right? So I just find that, I've done so much that I didn't think I would. And so I am open to opportunities that come my way. Um, and if I can continue sort of building relationships and getting to know people who are in this hobby for the joy of it, for being creative, for getting the most out of their tools, then, I'm like, I'd love to hang out with people and sort of share that enjoyment.
No, and that makes perfect sense because as also someone who's naturally introverted, both of us sitting here on a camera, doing videos and whatnot, it seems like within the stationary hobby and community, you're able to kind of break through that pane of glass and be more realistic with people because the people who are going to be your audience, they're just like you. They have the same pins or they want to have the same tools or they like to write with this where you like to write with this. But, it's that community follows around through all these different creators and makers and artists and writers. And that's just a great part of this hobby. But as we wrap up, Carola, thank you for taking some time today. I know this is a Canadian holiday, and I appreciate you having some time to, record this. And if you're listening, don't forget we do have this on Apple and Spotify. And be sure and check out the notes. We'll put links to all of Carola's social media presence and sign up for her class because, as you heard, it's going to sell out in San Francisco. So if you're attending that show, be sure and get signed up so you can create some art or possibly do choose your own adventure art at the show. You'll have to see. But once again, Carola, thank you for taking some time. And any final words before we let you go?
Oh, it's been so much fun. Thanks for having me, Derek.
Thanks. And until next time, we'll see you on the next episode.